Thank you. Also, for those standing in the front, or sitting, you're not standing, I talk with my hands a lot, so if this ends up in your face, I'm really sorry. Also, I'm so short. Yeah, I can walk across and not block the slides. Love it. Okay. So yes, I am Sam Torres. I don't know what happened there. I was originally a developer before this. I did front end, came to marketing actually because I wanted to be in visual merchandising, which really makes no sense how I'm here now, but here I am. I've been doing it for about 14 years, and now I get to run the Gray.company with my partner, Torres Gray. We have way too much fun solving really complex problems for our clients. And then I am a super member of Women in Tech SEO, which is amazing. Shameless call out. If you are here today and you identify as female or another marginalized gender, please join. It is free. That community has literally changed my life. That's how I met Tori. And it's amazing. And for those who do not identify as female, you can still get involved. Subscribe to our newsletter. It's incredible content, and it's always promoting women and just the amazing things that they are creating. That community is phenomenal. The most encouraging Slack community you will ever find in your life. It's awesome. All right, but that's not really what we're here to talk about today. Well, I'm always ready to talk about that, but we're going to talk about this. I do want to see who feels victimized by Google Search Console's 16-month window. Yep. And now we get to have it with GA4. You only get 14 months. That's super great, right? And then also, have you ever run into a time where you're looking at a Liquor Studio report and you're talking to a client or maybe a customer, and you're like, I promise the report is here. It's just taking a really long time. That is the most awkward pause and one of the ones I hate the most. So I'm going to try to help you solve those problems, and we're going to do all of it with BigQuery. So obviously we've been talking about it a lot. Noah did a great talk about it, Serge as well. How do you get that data out of GSC and into BigQuery? Google actually made it really easy for us now. So what I'm going to cover in here, we're going to talk about what is BigQuery, why would you want to use it? There's obviously, I'm biased and I have a lot of reasons why. We're going to talk about how the pricing works too, because maybe you've seen the horror stories of, oh my God, I got a $50,000 bill with Google from BigQuery. I'm going to help you avoid that. We're also going to talk about how do you even navigate the platform, because it looks kind of terrifying, especially if you've worked really with the marketing side of Google products. When you go into Google Cloud Console, it is overwhelming, and even I as a developer find it overwhelming. And then we're going to talk about something I call aggregate tables. Now, for any of my data scientists in the room, I know that there are aggregate functions in BigQuery. It's not the same. This is what I call it. So again, not an industry term. Don't tell your data scientists that's what they're called, because it's not really, but that's what I call them, because it makes sense to me. If you do want the slides, you can download them here. They're already up there. So I'll leave it here for 2 seconds. And then there's another one at the end. So, all right, so let's get started. Is BigQuery even worth it? Seems a little bit overwhelming sometimes, especially when you first log in. So let's talk about what is it. Just kidding, I fixed it. I'm never going to read that much to you guys. I don't hate anyone that much. So really the important things here that this is saying is that it is a place to store your data. You can store a ton of it. You can query it really quickly. And then it's also an infrastructure that you don't have to manage. All of that is already done for you. And then the other piece I want to call out here is that you use SQL to navigate it. Why is that important? SQL is old as dirt, which means there is a ton of documentation on it. There are a ton of tools to help you figure out how to use it. So there's already a community of support to make it that much easier to interact with your data. So what are the benefits? You get to scale. It's unsampled, right? If we've been seeing about the API. We actually start getting some of that data. Noah was calling out how you can see if it's an anonymized query, right? We get all of that actually already in BigQuery. If you're like me and you actually have to work across different platforms, or maybe you have integrated campaigns with your clients, you're logging into Google Ads and Meta and LinkedIn and TikTok and Reddit advertising and everything else in order to see your data. A lot of those tools have availability for you to put that data in BigQuery as well, so it could potentially become the one source where your information, where your data lives. And again, you can do a lot of things. And as far as access data back to day one, once you turn on the integrations, we're going to talk a little bit more, but basically any of the calculations you do retroactively applies to any of the data you already have. So let's continue. Again, so why doesn't everybody use it? This is the homepage for Google Cloud Console, which is how you get to BigQuery. Can you tell me where BigQuery is? Yeah, it's and it moves on you. It's not great. So we also need to, of course, talk about the pricing, because nobody wants surprise bills. And unfortunately, when you read the pricing documentation for BigQuery, it's like, what? That means nothing to me. So I'm going to tell you there's really two factors that decide how much your bill is going to be. The first is storage. So this is just how much data are you actually holding in BigQuery. The free tier actually gets you 10 gigs, which doesn't sound like much, but y'all, it's basically like CSVs. So imagine 10 gigs of CSVs. That is a ton of data. I have enterprise clients that they will have anywhere from 6 to 8 million URLs at a time, depending on their inventory. We are nowhere close. The storage is fine. Storage is cheap. And even if you were to extend past that, storage is still cheap. Like, to double that is like 15 cents a month. So if you're paying a lot for storage, you're getting screwed. And then after that is computation. So this is where how much are you actually interacting with the data? Are you transforming it? Are you pulling it? All that kind of good stuff. The free tier gets you a terabyte, which you're like, ooh, that sounds like a lot. Unfortunately, it's not. So this is where things start to get really expensive if you're not smart about how you're querying and interacting with your data. So if you do find that costs are up, there's probably some really inefficient queries. And anytime I've seen the horror stories of those, I was not expecting this $5,000 bill, that's been what's happened. Also, to give you context, I'm fortunate my agency has a number of enterprise clients, and we have set up these systems for them. Most of my clients are still under $10 a month. And their reporting is coming from it. We're basically using only BigQuery as our source for data, and it's still less than $10. My agency, we definitely don't even come close to ever having to pay anything, because, well, we're an agency website, so it happens. So let's talk about the compute cost. How does it build up? So this is a Looker Studio report that we put together for ourselves, actually, and this single chart that's showing the branded impression share seems like a really simple chart, right? It's things we do all the time. Well, what's happening here is that single query to build that report is having to look through and find specific keywords, query the impressions for that, and then also organize it by date. So there's already multiple functions happening here that seem really simple, but start to add up really quickly. So when you're going through this, you can create budget alerts. So this is a way to make sure you don't get that surprise bill, or at least you can't feign ignorance anymore, I guess would be part of a bad part. So when you're going into Google Search Console, I'm sorry, not Search Console, Cloud Console, I'm gonna do that so many times. You can create a budget. I'm not gonna walk you through all of the screenshots because you're tech SEOs, which means you're probably really good at following documentation. But you can set all these up, so I'll just talk through a few things. When you're specifying your budget, you can actually apply it to just specific organizations. So if you're agency and you have different clients in there, you can. Although I would highly recommend still make sure the client's credit card is on it, just in case somebody on their side gets stupid and plays with stuff. Not that any of my clients would ever do that. It's happened. And then you can also limit it by project or even a service. So if maybe your client does already have a Google Cloud Console account, or you do because you're doing other fun things with machine learning, you can just limit it based on whatever service you're running. This is really important if your organization does have an account and maybe the app that's powering your service runs through here. You don't want to limit what they're doing, but obviously you want to limit the cost you're causing. You can create alert thresholds. You can make these emails as annoying as you want to. And if you want to add the finance person on the email alerts, that's how you do it. So again, you'll have the slides so you can look at this later. Some of my favorite sample budgets, Google really likes to push last month's spend. That's the one it's always going to default to. My favorite is any. I want to know if I'm spending anything, because even if there's one day where it's like, hey, suddenly something costs 30 cents, I want to know about it, because a lot of times that could be a sign that a query started, and I want to make sure it's not going to run multiple times that day or multiple times that month. And then again, you can limit to the specific services, and those are the services that you would limit it to. Okay, so now we've talked about budgeting. So let's actually get started and like do something with it. How do we connect it? So this has to be one of my favorite things that Google ever gave us, is the bulk export from GSC. It's also the reason why my agency, we actually used to work in Snowflake or Redshift for any kind of data storage. That single thing kind of forced us to learn BigQuery. So I guess it was really smart of them. I don't know. Okay, so when you start, you do have to create a billing account, and you've probably already set up your budget. If you don't do this part before you try to connect everything, you will run into blockers. You also will have different limitations. So all you have to do is add a credit card. It won't get charged. But I can say, I think if you don't add a credit card, then you're limited to like 11 projects. Once you add it, you have up to 100, and you can always pay for more. Of course, Google will let you pay for more. So you're going to create a project. Now, when thinking about projects, think about how you want them to be separated. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And again, I'm not going to walk you through all these things, but you do have to enable the API the first time. That's kind of an important piece. I talk about how to find that. For GSC, this one is kind of a pain in the butt. You actually have to go through and add specific users that make no sense. So it's like this Search Console data export. I would never expect anyone to have them memorized. So definitely look through the documentation. You assign the types of jobs you want them to do. And then now you're going to go into GSC, into your settings, and turn on the bulk data export. The important part here, if you forgot what your project ID is when you need to fill it in, this is how you find it back in Cloud Console. And when you are setting your location, don't fuck it up. It is really hard to fix later. So because we're here, I'm assuming probably most of us, our data governance is based on US laws, but if you are dealing with GDPR, you need to put in whatever's there. BigQuery does a great job of making sure that your data stays compliant, that the infrastructure is protected. So that's why that's really important. And data set names, so you'll see that when it comes through. So if you are combining multiple properties, or maybe you're combining the different subfolders that Serge was talking about, that's a great way that you can start differentiating, but Search Console is always going to be there. Okay, once you've turned it on, you'll see this lovely bulk data export is active. It takes 24 to 48 hours for the data to start coming through. So unfortunately, this is not one of those projects where you can totally forget to do it and then do it 15 minutes before your meeting with your boss and be like, see, it's here. No, it's going to take a day. Sorry, y'all. And then you'll start seeing it coming through. Looks like that. So let's talk about GA4. Again, create a project. Or you could use the same one. It really just depends on what kind of organization works for you. The things I like to consider is, do I want to have separate budgets? And then also kind of the size across the different projects. I'm also just kind of a control freak, so I separate everything, but I realize not everybody wants to do that. They made it a whole lot easier in GA4. I don't have to do all that permissions crap. I literally just go to BigQuery links in the configuration, find my project, and put it all together. The only thing here, again, you got to select the right location. It's really, really hard when you get this wrong. Again, not that any clients have ever done that. So at this point, you get to configure your stream data. So what are you going to pull in? The important part here, you only get to pull in 1 million events per day. So for some enterprise clients, that does mean you're going to have more than one stream. But it also means, even for smaller sites, start limiting according to what you actually need, right? I think, yeah, that's going to be really hard to see. But one of the things on here that I'm excluding an event is view item list. This client is not e-commerce. So we don't need that event. It's already part of GA4, but basically that's just collecting a lot of fluff. And in fact, the fact that y'all probably can't see, but it's got like an event count or volume. I have no idea how. Like GA4, I don't know where you're getting that from, but it's super cool. Again, takes 24 to 48 hours, unfortunately. And then the tables in BigQuery for GA4 are like a little bit scarier, but I promise it's not too bad. Okay, so now you've got all your data pulling, and you're like, I should connect this to Looker Studio. No, please don't. Because again, that's where you would start adding a lot of query or compute time. You could find yourself really paying for a lot. Because if you connect Looker Studio to just those BigQuery tables, that is the raw data set. There'd be a lot of filtering going on all of the time. So don't do that, not just yet. But okay, so we're not gonna get there yet. I promise we will, but let's talk about how do we even get around BigQuery. So Noah was actually talking about this, that with the export, there are two tables that come through. You have either site or URL impressions. You also, that's where the SERP feature data lives, is the individual. If I'm doing testing and like playing with queries, I always try it on the site first and then build from there. And so this is what your tables end up looking like. So this is actually the individual URLs. I have what property is it, what is the actual URL, my query, and then you can see there's actually a lot of them just for this single homepage. And that's because I actually have a different row for every time a different SERP feature actually shows up. Now GA4, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. There is a table that's created for every single day. So it starts to get pretty expansive. From the look, but just know it's still very manageable. And they also do a lot of nesting. So even think about when we make schema and we have to nest the postal address and it's got all the different geo targets, the same things are happening in GA4 where we have a bunch of nesting going on, but it's all linked to an individual event name. So do consider that for GA4, it all starts with the event. So that's always gonna be kind of our most basic item or element with GA4 data. So yeah, so in BigQuery, it looks like this, where I get a timestamp and I get what my event name, y'all probably can't see that, but it says first visit, and then I have everything else that kind of goes with it. Anytime you want to know what kind of fields are actually being gathered, you can go to the schema tab in BigQuery. I highly recommend looking at this, because it also gives you an idea of what kind of data can you collect, how can you organize. Sometimes there's more in there that, well, at least for me, what has happened quite a few times is there's a lot more detail in there than I had considered. And it gets your wheels going as far as like, ooh, I could be really creepy and start tracking these things. Which, okay, so now there's just a ton of tables, and how does that really help you? I totally get it. There's a ton. Well, now we're going to talk about SQL, right? I was talking about that before. Mike mentioned it yesterday that I'd be talking about it. Yeah, again, it's really old, but that's how we interact with the data. We create queries to get back the data that we want. And yes, this is a sample query. I'll walk you through how they work. So first, you have your select statement. So this is where, what data do I actually want to pull, right? What are the metrics? What's the information that I actually want? From is just where do I actually want this to come from? So really important, especially if you are combining across tables. So I've absolutely built reports where we fill in GSC data and we're able to link it to GA4 to show a full funnel. Where would be any kind of filtering. So in the sample I just showed you, one of those was, okay, I don't want the query to be null and I want it to be people in the US because that's the majority of what customers that I service. And then order by is just, how do you want that to be ordered? How do you want that to be separated to you? Okay, queries can be super simple, like this, or they can get really crazy, which is why I don't write them myself, tools do. I don't know why I would ever write my own SQL query anymore, except to make fake ones for presentations. So this is my favorite tool, GA4 for SQL. It is a generator. It is not an AI tool, which also means it's more eco-friendly. I do also really like this one. They've got it for both GA4 and GSC, but basically it just provides a really nice GUI for selecting the things that you want, and they stay up to date as far as how Google names things. So like when they changed from conversions to key events, I think it took the guys 3 days to update the tool. So, and it's completely free. And I love free stuff, because who doesn't? So with a query, when you run it, you'll actually get your query results right in front of you. Okay, so now we know how to work with the data. So let's actually talk about the magic. How am I going to make sure that you don't get charged a bunch of money? Which, by the way, if you screwed up and you get charged a bunch of money, disclaimer, I don't owe you anything. I am a small business owner. I have a kid. He's really expensive. All right, so the process that we're going to do with this is, first you're going to use your measurement plan, which, shameless plug, we have, in fact, written an entire article about how to create a measurement plan, and we give away a template. And actually, if you download the slides, there's a link to all that. The reason why I love measurement plans, and something to know about me, is just in general, I love documentation because I don't want to have to remember things later, because that's just too much work. So in a measurement plan, what it should be doing is actually saying, okay, here's all the things I'm going to measure. Here are the things I actually care about. And then one of my favorites is also, here's how I'm tracking those things. That becomes really useful when, maybe Andy from design decides to change all your buttons, and he didn't ask you about it. He just changed everything, and now you can't track anything. That's a way that you can start diagnosing, makes it much easier. So definitely use a measurement plan. That's going to help us identify what data we actually care about. Then we're going to create some tables, and then we're going to set up a job so that that table updates every day as new data comes in from the bulk export. And then those new tables are the ones that we're going to connect to Looker Studio, and we'll talk more about why. Okay, so when it comes to decide what data you want, again, use your measurement plan. The first ones I always start with are these. So I just want to see things by page, by device, by country, all that good stuff. Event data as well. How do people enter my site based on what channels, all that good stuff. And I would say start small. Just build a few. One of the reasons I love front-end development is because of the instant gratification, right? We're able to code things and immediately see that it's working. So again, let yourself have a few wins. Don't try to tackle everything at once. You will drive yourself crazy. And I guess we're probably all a little bit crazy because we're tech SEOs, but let's try to slow the roll as much as we can. And again, also think about all of your data is in BigQuery already. Well, once you turn it on. So anything you collect after that, the data I'm collecting now, if I were to make a query next year, it's still going to go through my entire database because all of that data still lives there. Now, obviously, it can't make up data, so if you have a problem of custom events aren't tracking, that's not going to fix it. But anything that's already there, you're going to be able to go back and retroactively calculate. So after that, you now know what you're pulling. You use one of the tools to write a SQL query for you. Explorer, not to be confused with Noah's Explorer from, 2 Octobers. That's what BigQuery calls their preview panes. One of the things to note here, when you go to write a query, many times it'll actually show you, I know there's supposed to be a laser pointer on here. I have no idea how to use it. Okay. It'll actually tell you how much computation power it'll take to run it. So again, that's where you can start getting an idea of, this might be a really inefficient query, which is also why when I'm testing, I always add this limit 1,000. That's to give me an idea of, is this actually the data that I want, so that I'm not wasting all my budget in playing around, because I feel like tech SEOs, that's what we love to do. That's why we do what we do. All right, so you press the button run. This is one of those times where Google's trying to trick us. And then you get your results. You can actually save them into a BigQuery table. So you're going to go ahead and name that BigQuery table whatever you want it to be. I recommend not being super fun or creative with it so that you know what it is later. So for example, this one is just my site-wide queries and clicks. So I just wanted to know what are all the queries that my site has and how many clicks and impressions is it getting. And I have it by day, actually. All right. So now that's going to be my table that has worked through my entire data set that's already existing, whether it's been there for a week or data that's been there for a year. We finally, that's going to be kind of like what sets the base for that table. So now I'm going to take that same exact query, but I'm going to change it to only look for yesterday's date. Now, if you're a really large site, I would actually recommend doing 2 days before, and that's because the bulk export, when it decides to do it, can vary wildly. And then also, if you are a site that's used to having to wait 48 hours to see your data in GSC anyways, you're probably going to run into the same problem. So maybe so for small sites, again, I would just do yesterday, but for our larger brands, we do 2 days ago. Because what I'm going to do now is actually hit that schedule button. So, I'm going to test the query to make sure it works, but I'm going to schedule it. And what I'm going to do is make sure that it appends to that table I created earlier. So that's the table I'm going to use, that site-wide queries and clicks. That's the table I'm going to use to start generating my Looker Studio reports. Why? That calculation is only happening once per day. If that Looker Studio report was still connecting to the raw data set, that means every time someone loaded that Looker Studio report, those queries would be run, literally every time. And I don't know if you all have clients like I've had where you think, honestly, they're refreshing it all day. I don't know what else they do. Then look at that. Or we've also had clients where we set up real-time monitoring dashboards. Obviously, this is not a use case where you can do that because we're waiting on a delay from GA4 and GSC. There's really nothing we can do about that. Or if there is, I don't know it. But that would just be constantly refreshing. You would absolutely see a big bill, or possibly in Looker Studio start getting your quota exceeded messaging, which is not infuriating at all. And that's pretty much it. I went really fast. All right.